Some of you may become somewhat uncomfortable as parts of this film unfold, but I think if you listen carefully...
Nature has intended that everybody shall be a
A healthy, happy sex life is the most wonderful and exciting. We've all experienced curiosity about ourselves and the opposite sex. Who hasn't?
I'm Megan.
I'm Marcella.
And I'm Colin.
And this is Kevin. This is Remedial Sex Ed.
Yay!
Yay! That was like take 4.
That's good.
So, a couple weeks back, we did our favorite book review of The Ever Terrible Joy of Sex.
Yes, very sarcastic favorite.
Very sarcastic favorite. And I flagged a section in the Pickles and Sauces that was...
Sauces and Pickles.
Sauces and Pickles. That was titled Japanese Style. Which is why I wanted to invite our friend Kevin onto the show.
Hello. Cue me. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks
so, Kevin, do you want to give like a
Yes.
quick intro to yourself?
Why
Sure.
are you here? Why is any of us here? But
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why specifically?
Existential crisis first, please.
Absolutely. So, Megan, we were talking off the record about this, the conversation about the joy of sex and how there's this word Oriental in it. I think it was like also the word exotic in there, right? Mm-hmm. Like it was kind of used synonymously, exotic and Oriental. And I think I'm pretty sex positive as well, so we talk stories about that. I think that's how you invited me and looked me into it. So I would consider myself as a sex positive, cisgendered, gay male, Asian American. I identify as Asian American. No hyphen, by the way. Yeah, that could be another conversation. But yeah, no hyphen, Asian and American. Here, living in Los Angeles, living the dream.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Kevin, your parents are both Japanese.
Yes.
You're very in touch with your Japanese culture.
Luckily, yeah. Then, half jokingly, I always say that I was raised fobby. Like neck deep into the Japanese culture, and so when you guys in your past podcasts, you guys had like TV show references and whatnot, that just like totally flies by me. Didn't grow up with MTV and whatnot, but in that sense though, yeah, I was been super in touch with my Japanese culture here, being raised in America, and always curious about why Japanese people behave and think the way that they do. See, and I say they because I don't necessarily identify 100% with being Japanese. So I'm kind of a hybrid of, I'm American but also Japanese, and so kind of like this, the living at that chasm of like biculturalness, multiculturalness and whatnot. So growing up, super appreciative of the hentai culture.
Really?
I don't know if I don't know if people know what hentai means, but yeah, I have some notes about what the word hentai means in America versus in Japan. So yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Marcella, did you have something to add that I totally cut you off on?
No, I just wanted to say how excited I am, especially when we're talking about things like being bicultural. Both of my parents are actually immigrants as well, and I very much identify with that sense of I would never call myself El Salvadoran or even Guatemalan, but I was raised with some of those beliefs, and also their even though my mom isn't Catholic, there was some sense of that like Catholic guilt and stigma around sex. So it's interesting the things that we gain from our parents' culture, and also the things that we gain from living here. And I'm so excited to bring on Kevin today, because I'm thrilled, because there are so many, every culture has very different experiences and explanations and even practices within sex. And I think this is a great diving off point as we react to Joy of Sex.
Right, because culture is not stagnant, that even the Joy of Sex had to really try, at least attempt, to reflect on the change in culture, right? So like, you and I multicultural, bicultural, like the culture that we grew up with, right, through our parents, and the culture that it is now, obviously is different. So it's a very dynamic conversation to be had. And if we had the same conversation 5 years from now, probably we'd probably be talking about something different, even if it's like Japanese style.
Right.
I started my notes with like the conversation of the joy of sex, because that's where this stemmed out of, right?
Yeah.
But what as I was reading more about the joy of sex and like the idea, how problematic it was, is like this like immense cultural bias. And then obviously I listened to you guys' episode about how much you guys love it.
So much.
Like
We loved it so much.
5-star review said no one. There's like an immense cultural bias against people who don't fit into the sort of heteronormative white culture, right? As I was digging more, I can't claim to know too much about it, but there's also this thing called the Madame Butterfly effect. I think it has to do with something to the effect of the submissive, right, coy Asian woman, and that she's no longer this like human entity, but rather a coquettish doll like object. If you want to call it sexual object,
or
right?
in
Coveted.
more crash term that I think people refer to it nowadays is the yellow fever. I
Yeah.
think is the worst phrasing that I've heard of it.
Asian fetish, yellow fever,
And I have friends who are Asian women who absolutely hate it.
And it's mostly white men
Yeah.
who
Wait,
have the
they-
Asian fetish.
Asian women who absolutely hate being kind of fetishized,
Yeah.
or dating exclusively only white.
They hate the
People
idea that
or
they
whatever.
are specifically only being targeted for
Oh,
the fact
yes,
that they're
yes.
Asian.
Mm-hmm.
That the reason that people want to date them is because they think that they are this, as you said, like
Going to be a
submissive doll.
demure little
Right.
waifu.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, but it gets even worse than that. I think it's like this idea of like these petite Asian women have the smallest pussies available to you. Like they're gonna it gets
Real
into
gross.
the grossest, most ridiculous stereotypes of what an Asian woman wants or is going to feel like, or just their relationship with men. Like, I think it's still so prevalent, and it's so sad to see. It's the same with, I mean, every single culture seems to have like Black women are this, and Latina women are this, and Asian women are this. But Asian specifically, it's this whole butterfly. They're submissive and they just want to please their man, and all of it's super painful to watch in media specifically.
But in like real like dating worlds too, right? Like I think OkCupid and a lot of other places have done research on that, about like dating preferences in the modern world, and how Asian women are super coveted in the dating scene,
And how Asian men are rejected.
Not.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, yay me.
I read some really fascinating articles as to the root of that, and how it was all, white men being afraid by the sudden emergence of a certain demographic in the area, and the white women starting to dance with them. So of course they had to put them down and say their penises are small and all of this other complete BS, just so that they could, steal the white women back.
And suppress others.
Yeah.
It's systematic.
Yeah, it is.
Colin?
Why are you looking at me?
No.
What did I...
Megan? No, the other male in the room. Yeah. I mean, but maybe the dynamics are a little different in the queer culture, like queer dating scene, but yeah. I can't say that in my life I've never been fetishized for just being Asian.
Oh, I've heard
And
it.
I have a story about that, so Kevin has a story about that. But that's deviating from like the joy of sex, because there's nothing joyful about that
We don't
experience.
have to talk about it if you don't want.
But it involves this. I'm just making the hand motion.
It's nothing like a visual gag.
Yeah.
Nice visual bit.
Yeah, it's dehumanizing, right?
Yes.
Like quite literally. and figuratively, like dehumanizing the Asian body,
Mm-hmm.
the Asian body itself,
Very
quite
much.
frankly. So, you know, when I hear this word Oriental,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it serves anybody any good to use that word,
Mm.
you know?
Yeah.
So it being in the book, in the original edition, but even in the second or perhaps the third edition of
Yeah.
the Joy of Sex, I mean, it's
stays.
just like really bad editing,
It is.
Yeah.
right? It's sort of like, did you really not go through with a fine, you know, tooth comb and edit out this word that just really does not serve any community any good?
Yeah,
I
it's
have
a
a
totally
feeling that
loaded
the second
term.
edition was just a cash grab, if anything. Like it
The
didn't
2008
seem...
edition?
Yeah.
I thought there was a second edition in that. Doesn't matter.
Now that oh shoot, I forget which edition
I think
it
the
was.
one we read is the third or fourth.
Yeah, it was. You're right. It wasn't
But
the
still,
second, but whatever
in-
it was,
in
2008. It was just a
2008.
cash grab.
Not
Anyway,
Yeah.
not catching stuff like that. It's like that certainly wasn't a word that was okay to say in 2008, or maybe I don't know. Maybe it was.
No.
I think that for some reason there's still a lot of gray area around the term Oriental, which I would never use. I think it's offensive because it's casting, which, you know, we do with so many cultures around the world, but it's casting a large, very different group of human beings under one easy containable word and just packaging them so that we can understand it as different and other. And I know that the conversation was brought up around the word during the Obama administration because he banned the use of the word Oriental in any federal documents. But even then, there's been like all of this talk as to whether or not Oriental is actually offensive, and coming from people of East Asian backgrounds, just saying, you know, I've never been called Oriental as a slur. There are plenty of other slurs that I've been called about what I am, but Oriental has never been it. But I hate the word just because it is being like, all of these people are the same when there are such rich cultural differences by nation, by region. So yeah.
Here.
Mm.
Remind me what the author or the authors have talked about in terms of the Japanese style.
So what what they say is, what would be hard to copy is the essentially Japanese mixture of violence and formality, which does not sit easily with our tradition of tenderness. Intercourse on the floor or on cushions, as with most Oriental styles. Partial nakedness only. Numerous squatting and semi-squatting positions. If you want to talk about essentialism, it says the word essentially Japanese in there. It says, what would be hard to copy is the essentially Japanese mixture of violence and formality, which is, I think, is obviously how this book is characterizing Japanese attitudes towards sex, but also how I think, like, a lot of Americans and a lot of white people view Japanese attitudes towards sex.
I think in some ways, the Japanese people have always been trying to grapple with how to have the right conversation, yet still keeping that sense of Japaneseness, which is like that properness. And nonverbal communication is important because, I don't know, not to like see our world as a dichotomy of like collectivistic versus individualistic culture, but unlike individualistic cultures like how America is, collectivistic culture tends to lean towards nonverbal communications. Like things are not very explicit, very like nuanced, right? That they're very nuanced and subtle. And so to keep with the tradition or the culture, I think it's always grappled of like, how do we enjoy ourselves and at the same time keep intact our culture of the collectivistic. We don't talk about sex outright because it's rude to other people. Though we individually might want to talk about it and engage in it. So I think it's always been that grapple, but I'm seeing the tides changing a lot more as Japan as a culture, the Japanese style has gotten a lot more Americanized or quote unquote Westernized. So I have an example of that that I can share later on. So I don't know if that resonates with you guys in any way. Yeah.
No, that's good.
No, that's brilliant.
I think that.
And I think, okay, so I guess I'll start with some questions that I have because I think it ties back into exactly what you just talked about. So, Colin and I actually went to Japan for our honeymoon.
Yes.
Yay! And you were super sweet as to offer to give us Japanese lessons beforehand that we unfortunately did not take you up on.
It's okay, I could have been like, hentai, BDSM is BDSM in Japanese.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
So, I absolutely love Japan. I really want to go back someday.
Oh, yeah,
it was so cool, and the people are so nice. And you're right, there is this extreme sense of politeness.
Yes.
In Japan, and I find that fascinating. And to tie back what you just kind of said about like the kind of relationship about talking about sex. So, what I kind of want to unpack that in Japan
please.
Like how can you have like a culture that is famous for things like hentai and tying people up and yet not have a relationship with like easily talking about sex. Like I think that's fascinating, and I think you could say the exact same thing about white people as well. But
well, let's start with that then.
Something that I find super interesting coming from I was a Japanese anime. I was a manga kid, all growing up, and
Weeaboo.
oh yeah, learning. I'm gonna pronounce everything wrong, but like shonenai, shoujoi, like all of the different things that I was like fascinated by, and kind of learned a lot of my sexuality by exploring like these comic book. Manga, but yes, to describe it's like is that the simplest way to translate for anybody who doesn't know what manga is? Just like Japanese comic book.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think you hit a good point. It's sort of like the Japanese culture has always tried to find ways to engage in the conversation without being like verbal about it. From a lack of a better term, it's like, hey, do you want to have conversations about sex? I honestly don't know if sex ed is part of the Japanese educational system. I'm not sure. If any of the listeners have any input on that, comment below,
tweet at us,
or tweet at us. Leave it on the Instagrams.
Yeah.
I'm trying to talk like a digital mark.
No, you're doing good.
You're doing way better than
like
we
and
ever
subscribe.
did.
Smash that like button.
Yeah. It's like, don't wait till the end of this podcast to subscribe.
Yeah.
And leave a comment about, if their Japanese educational system touches on sex ed, because that's what we're here for. But they use creative ways to engage people, young and old, to be in this conversation about what is sex, what might feel good, what is deviant from like quote unquote normal sex and whatnot. I think anime really does help with that, kind of categorize, because it's very easy to categorize books, right?
Yeah.
But then it's sort of like conversations could be a little harder in terms of categorizing and whatnot. So I think maybe they took the easier or creative route to really create categories of sex as their form of sexual education, or as the Japanese style sex ed, by way of things like animation, manga, even art, as we talked about a little earlier. Right, from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. No, this is not this is not pornography. This is art.
Yeah.
It's called hentai, and it's art.
Yeah, these beautiful block print artwork is art. Everybody, so don't freak out. So maybe they were really finding creative ways and continue to find creative ways to have conversations about sex because, hey, you can talk about art and be, kind and mature and all that stuff that, for the most part represents Japanese culture, without getting too vulgar. So I think that's a loophole that they were trying to search. And
Gotcha.
That's really interesting.
And they found it.
Yeah.
So that's my interpretation of how that came about.
Nice.
So it goes from the woodcuts
Yeah.
to today to hentai.
The hentai. And you mentioned about the, in terms of Japanese style, the book also talks about rope tying, right?
Mhm.
Rope tying. And I like it.
I'm all for it.
Right? Like we're here for it. From what I know about that, I don't know, I want to call it subculture because it's not anything lower, but the rope tying culture is an art form in itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked at a couple.
Shibari is insanely
Shibari
beautiful.
culture is like, And so from what I read in terms of the Japanese blogs about what's it called? Kinbaku. It's called Kinbaku. 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 It's like tight binding.
Mm-hmm.
It's the translation of it, Kinbaku. So Kinbaku or Kinbaku beat. Just Kinbaku beat is basically the beauty of of tight binding.
Okay.
So see, the language that is still being used around this fetish is the Japanese see it as art.
Yeah.
So we go back full circle now, right? They still see it as even kink and fetish is an art form, or they want to perceive it that way, so that they can maybe have more safely have more conversations about it through books and art, like videos too.
I have to say in the terms of the rope tying, because I've seen photos of it, and I think it depends on where you get the photos from, because I think the actual photos of it are beautiful, and those ropes, I have no hope in this life of ever recreating
So intricate,
them. They're
right?
so intricate,
Yes.
and they're beautiful, and no amount of summer camp could have ever prepared me for that.
Can you imagine if the Boy Scouts of
Boy Scouts.
Boy Scouts of America, shout out to them for including women now too, right?
Are they?
Yeah.
Was it the
I
other
don't
way
know,
around?
actually.
Cool.
I think so.
Right? How often are we going to tie a knot to as seafarers?
That's true. It has a lot more practical application than
I think. I mean, it also talks about it allows for perhaps young adults to be like, oh, cool, there's such a thing.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's call it kink or not at that stage in their life. It's sort of oh, okay, cool. This is a safe way to play with things.
Yeah, it's another part why broadening the spectrum of sexuality a little bit.
Yes.
Which is not what I would think of when I think of sex education. When I think of sex education, I think of just the basics. You are going to get chlamydia and die.
Mm-hmm. It's
very first you get pregnant, but this is so much more. This is so much more sex positive and trying to broaden people's horizons a little bit. So.
American sex ed probably is more restrictive, right? It comes from a very restrictive point of perspective than expansive.
I would say the majority of that is
Yes.
true.
Amen.
I would say 80%.
Yeah.
I've talked to some people. I think it 100% depends on what school you went to and who your teacher was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even then, it's not even totally 100% because I think Los Angeles gets categorized as somewhere where you can get a decent sex ed. I've talked to people, that's not always the case.
Mm.
I think you're right. American sex ed is restrictive. It's telling you what not to do.
Yes.
When maybe a better form of sex ed would be telling you what you can do, what possibilities there are, and how to do it safely.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's expand, right?
Yeah.
Let's have more of an expansive perspective on sex ed, including the vocabulary and the visual representation of what could be, including Kinbaku or Kinbaku be hey, sex could be an art form too.
Yeah.
Boys and girls, that might fly over their head at that point, but sort of at least build an appreciation for the discipline that goes into it. Which is another thing, right? The Japanese are all about being disciplined. I think that's that creates a repressive that pent up sexual energy that just kind of backfires and they go all balls to the wall, like kinky as fudge. You know, and it's like they kinky. But it's like a very disciplined culture too, because like, you know, whether it be judo or like the martial arts, right? All the dos in there, like the judos and the karate's not Japanese, but like all those are forms of discipline, like sports and whatnot. There's a form of
judo in high school.
Right.
Oh wow, cool.
Yeah, it's fun.
Colin flipped me. It was great for that time that I had a crush on him, but we weren't doing anything.
So it was like yes to judo, but no to good sex ed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Priorities, people.
Yeah.
Priorities. Yeah, so it's like all those are forms of discipline in the Japanese culture, and I think they're Japanese culture is really into that. So I think they also see sex as like from a discipline perspective too. And I think in extension, right, this the rope binding and the rope bondage, they instill these like disciplines of like how to, what are the different patterns? Mm-hmm. They call it kata. Kata, kata, as like different forms. Mm-hmm. And, growing up, I practiced martial arts.
Yeah, I was going to say it's the same language. Kata.
Yes. Like judo and kendo, which I practice, we have this thing called kata, which is basically forms. Mm-hmm. The basic forms that you have to go, and then you it's up to you how you kind of artfully kind of put them together.
Yeah, it's like a choreography of the martial movement.
Yes, it's a choreography.
Okay.
It's sets of choreography that you put together to basically perform, right? Martial arts. That's what it's called, martial arts. So the rope bondage has these forms. Mm-hmm. The katas, they have katas. And that includes like the way in which you start and finish the bondage, the rope bondage. What part of the body do you start, put the rope around, and how do you twist? Do you twist it left? Do you twist it right? That's sort of
do you overlap the rope? Like it is like so specific and beautiful, and it just makes American style bondage kind of look clunky in a way. And I practice all happy with everything, but but like the idea of using handcuffs, or how often people who are using rope bondage who don't understand how to use a tie that doesn't slide, so that you aren't cutting off blood supply or things like that. The knowledge that Japanese rope tying uses to make sure that everything is safe and still gets that tension, and there's definitely a very specific arousal that comes with being tied up in that way. And it's also it's a way of showing care for your partner, how intricately you care and make sure that they're okay and comfortable as you put them in these beautiful positions.
Like there's one position called the ebi, E-B-I, ebi. Ebi literally means the shrimp. So you're basically like,
picture it.
Yeah, right? Like, who doesn't want to be a camarone, right? Camarones?
Yeah.
It's the Japanese style camarones. So yeah, I agree with you. It's like all that.
I agree with you. This is, I love this. This is the greatest. I'm so excited.
And so, like, I just wanted to add that, like, in my research, I also found a site called ropetopia.com.
Ooh.
And the author of Ropetopia said that for shibari, basically, like the rope bondage, it needs to fulfill all of the following criteria, including it has to be beautiful, it has to be effective, and it has to have a Japanese aesthetic.
Ooh, okay.
So according to Ropetopia, like the shibari, the act of shibari kink,
sorry, what's the difference between Kinbaku and shibari?
Oh yeah, and the site also talks about that. It's like depends on your preference.
Oh.
Yeah, it depends on your preference if you want to go with Kinbaku.
But what's the act? What's the difference?
The
Yeah, like
tightness
Kinbaku is
of-
a lot more of a strict terminology, I think, that talks about it's like a and shibari is literally just a tie.
Oh, okay. Now I
So
know.
Kinbaku is more like tight bounding, and I think it's in BDSM and like kink culture, Kinbaku is used more frequently than shibari. But shibari is a lot more like colloquial.
Oh.
This is a lot more relatable, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, just like you tie like a pork.
Oh.
Like you shiboru or you shibaru is to tie up
Gotcha.
pork.
Gotcha.
So like if you want to make it extra special, you I think you use the word Kinbaku. Then it's like 100%. You don't Kinbaku a pork.
Right.
That's great. I totally didn't realize that terminology. Thank you.
From my understanding, so like, so the weight of the language, Kinbaku is a lot more of a special occasion thing that isn't necessarily used in everyday Japanese language, but shibari is. It just means to tie up.
Okay.
Yeah. Cuffs are things that are used to bind prisoners, right? Or people who have offended, had some kind of...
Yes, it's totally based on like medieval
It's like
torture
punitive.
practices.
Yes.
A lot of, at least Western BDSM, you're using like the X-frame and things that, what are they called? The stocks and stuff like that are 100% used for criminals.
Right, criminals and like these equipments of...
But you wouldn't Kinbaku a criminal.
No, that's the
Right,
thing.
that's not the
Actually,
difference.
they did.
Oh, they did? Oh,
Yes, so that's where it came from.
Oh.
So I'm trying to make
so it's the same.
Yes.
So I thought you were.
Yes.
I thought you were going to say the exact opposite.
Oh, I'm sure maybe some of the listeners were like, they thought that I'm heading that way.
No.
The point is that like just like the instruments that are used in BDSM, like whips included, right?
Yeah.
Like punitive stuff, as you say. Like the Kinbaku, like basically tying people up, started with prisoners.
Okay.
Yeah. So in Japan, like there's this thing called Hojojutsu. Hojojutsu. And Hojojutsu, I think it's called. Hojojutsu. Hojojutsu, they called it the art of binding a prisoner of war. So you can't be more literal than that. Like Hojojutsu is like the ways of like basically not torturing necessarily, but like tying prisoners of war. And they use the same rope that we use to this day with Kinbaku, which is usually that jute, that rough, natural fiber, coarse rope.
Yeah.
Right? Not silk. Not this like ribbon thing. And there's some variations. They use like cotton fabric sometimes to bind people, but for the most part, the traditional way that I've seen is using that kind of natural colored hemp jute rope that historically were used to bind prisoners. So there's that commonality in terms of like if you want to see it as like Western Eastern culture and whatnot, that this form of BDSM of Kinbaku is said to have started from
punishment,
how they've treated prisoners.
Yeah.
And this like power dynamic, I guess, is like always present, right? Always present. Yeah. And I've also heard that like, so I haven't had the pleasure of going through Kinbaku, either doing it on someone or being done. But what I've also heard is that it's not necessarily the physical pleasure of getting these intricate ropes tied around the body, but rather the process is very is seen as more erotic.
Okay.
again, it's like
very...
very...
You're slowly being tied up. You're like surrendering control. And,
because you're not like arm's length, right? You're not like trying to like, oh, let me just tie this rope. Oh, but keep yourself arm's length, you know. No, it's a very intimate process between two or more bodies. And it takes a certain discipline to make those twists and turns and knots and whatnot. I think that, it's almost like a mental stimulation.
I'm so ready. Yes.
Oh my gosh, she's so into it.
All of this. No. What I think is really cool about it is, just as you were saying, there's this connection between partners as you're doing this, because I'm completely free with my body. Like, I have full liberty to remove myself from that situation, but instead you're allowing your partner to take all of this from you, right? You're giving them trust. You're bestowing on them, like, I know that I can trust you as defenseless as I can be. It's really symbolic in my brain anyway, as I experience these things, of just allowing myself to be completely vulnerable with someone else. And for me, the reason that I've liked the very few explorations that I've done with Kinbaku, it does, I feel, this is going to sound really weird, but I feel, it's like the opposite of what you would guess. The word that keeps coming to mind is like a princess, but that's not right. I feel like I'm being praised. Like, my body is being very specifically examined and taken care of and put in a specific position. And it's very artistic. So as a theater person, I think maybe I'm just like, this is beautiful art and I'm so ecstatic to be a part of it. But no, you're absolutely right. It's that process of just being in that moment with your partner and handing vulnerability, but also feeling like so much praise and devotion, care is being given to you.
And you know, I think you mentioned a key word just a second ago about symbolic. Yeah. You said something, it's like almost symbolic, and that just goes back to what we were talking about of the Japanese culture, right? It's a, you know, because it's a very much collectivistic culture, it's about the symbolism, it's about the nonverbal communication, right? That matters more in communicating value. And in this case, communicating care for each other, instead of saying, instead of more verbal confirmations.
I'm learning so much.
Yeah. I mean, but like Japanese porn, by the way, is also known for its like really outlandish, like verbal shit. Like the famous like iku, right? Like the girl being like almost like she's on hallucinogens and just like screaming at the top of her lung like iku, and like totally like about to blow her head off and whatnot. Like, right? But like iku means like I'm going. It's not I'm coming.
I'm going.
Yeah, it's like I'm going. Where are you going, girl? Where are you going? You're about to lose your head. But iku means like iku, like the it means to go. Yeah. Kuru means to come. So I think that's interesting.
That is very interesting.
Japanese 101.
Yeah. You don't say I'm coming, you say I'm going.
Yes, I'm going.
I think the reason for that would be I could see how iku would be easier to scream out
than kudo.
Yeah, it could just be a little easier.
It's just phonetically
well,
easier.
It's also...
Oh my gosh, I hope these walls are thick enough.
I mean, it's for the internet.
It's for the interwebs.
It's fine.
Yeah. But yeah, again...
It sort of makes me think of how in French orgasm is sometimes called le petit mort. La petit mort. It means the little death. So it's kind of like you're going, your soul is leaving your body.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
I mean, I think that's probably the best description I've heard of it thus far, is the little death.
A little death.
I like that description.
I love how multicultural this conversation is becoming. It's like a little French.
Yeah, a little French, a little Japanese.
A little French, a little Japanese. Yeah, so it's like, as much as it's also an art form, it's about the nonverbal communication and the care that you put into one, understanding the culture and the technique of Kinbaku.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in turn, is like a nonverbal communication between partners. And that heightens the eroticism and the sexual energy, I think, than the actual physical kind of pleasure of the rope against the body per se. But who knows? Maybe some people also like that physical, discomfort. So
Yeah, the sensation.
it could be both. It probably is both, but I think in this context, where I'm choosing to emphasize more on the mental and the communication that there is.
Can we talk about Japanese porn for a hot second?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, we've said hentai a couple times.
Oh yeah! Oh my God! Do you guys want to know some interesting things about the word hentai?
Yes!
That I've uncovered. Okay, so question: what do you think hentai means?
I've heard.
Oh, hentai, by the way, hentai.
I've heard that it translates to pervert.
Okay.
Kind of.
Any other?
I only know the word hentai in the terms of how it's used to describe animated Japanese porn. That's the only way I've heard it described.
Oh my God, y'all are knocking it out of the park.
I'm literally with Megan on this one.
Yeah. As an anime lover yourself, yes.
Yep.
That's probably one of our first encounters, right, with the word hentai.
Yes.
Right, and it's y'all are correct. It's like hentai is I think a big part of the anime culture. And so at least in American culture, I think, but perhaps in the English speaking or the Western culture, hentai is now known as a subset of anime culture.
That sounds about right.
But like hentai actually means so many different things in the Japanese culture, and I just wanted to share a couple of that.
Okay.
Couple of
Yes,
things.
please.
So like when you Google translate the word hentai, pervert isn't the first thing that comes up. The first word that comes up when you translate hentai is transformation.
What?
Really?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like ooh, curveball. Yeah, so hentai, they translate it as transformation, and then like second or third down the list is like words that are slightly less positive, like abnormality, pervert, perversion, as definitions of hentai. When I looked up the word hentai, the second vocab translation of the word hentai actually resonated with me, and it's the word metamorphosis. You would never imagine,
Suspect
right?
M butterfly.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm like, oh, it's coming together. Why a butterfly? Was that all about hentai culture? So hentai also means metamorphosis. And I was actually watching a Japanese TV show about like larvae and butterflies, and then they use the word hentai in it. And I had this knee-jerk reaction, like, "Oh my God, are they going there? Like, how are they tying butterflies?
What are they going to do to those larvae?"
Yeah, it's like, ew. But I'm intrigued. Please
Not
go
turning
on.
it off.
Yeah, I was like, gasp! But how Japanese TV programming have changed. Like, butterflies fluttering, and then the next word that comes out is like hentai, and I'm like, what? But they meant like hentai as in metamorphosis. It's like literal translations of changing form. And I haven't like fully connected the dots in my brain, but like with the word hentai and it being synonymous with words like transformation, metamorphosis in the Japanese language, at least, I think it's just a conversation to be had. Because in American culture, in the English speaking culture, at least, like hentai means like 99% something sexual.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, lost in translation, I'm not sure. Like, I think we don't see the other sides of hentai, the word hentai itself, in America. So, at least for me, as an American-born Japanese, it was fascinating that this word can mean so many different things to the Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
And in Japanese porn, there is also this word called ecchi. Ecchi. Say it with me. Ecchi.
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 Yeah. Oh, ecchi. So
What am I
ecchi is
saying?
like, yeah, ecchi. Yeah. What are they saying, right? Like, ecchi means like, oh, pervert. Yeah, like, oh, ecchi.
But like in an excited, kind of aroused kind of way?
It could be. It could be. Or if someone's on, if people are in the train and then someone like touches a body part and they're kind of naughty. Oh, ecchi can also mean naughty.
Okay.
So it's like, oh, ecchi. It could be kind of bad sense. Like,
Okay.
like, oh my god, you pervert. Like, you just touched me.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be kind of like, oh, ecchi. As in like,
Perv.
oh my god, you're touching me seductively. Like, do more. Which is what, yeah. So the word ecchi comes up in Japanese porn so often. And it's like cute. The word ecchi is also cute.
It is.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's not like, oh, you turn me on. It's a very cute way of saying like, oh, you perv. And I think that also is like that, the Japanese-ness of like, and, there's like anime and all this stuff, like, they want to be cute and whatnot. So I think it's just in line with that. The Japanese love to use the word ecchi. And the word ecchi comes from the letter H.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it like the Queen's English? H is
Oh, yeah, they say H.
H,
H.
Yeah.
right? It's
Correct.
like a hard
Yeah.
sound.
Interesting.
And I think, an extension of it. Oh, by the way, the Japanese used to teach the Queen's English. Like, my mom grew up
Oh.
learning
Like
the
a little-
Queen's English
A
instead
little
of...
bit of a British
Most
accent.
Yeah,
countries
yeah.
do that, and most countries they get taught in schools with the British accent, but a lot of countries adopt an American because despite what they're being taught in schools, they watch American television, and that's what takes hold.
The
Yeah.
dominance of TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My mother also learned the Queen's English.
There you go.
Yeah.
So this is commonality here. So she grew up back in the day, like learning Queen's English. Like, it wasn't how are you, it's how do you do,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So with that in mind, how the Japanese have learned, have acquired the English language, I think that that just goes to how they took the first letter of the alphabet of hentai,
Mhm.
H, the H on
Oh.
hentai, and then they truncated it into ecchi.
Oh.
So ecchi
Interesting.
really is a
That's
truncated version of hentai.
Oh.
Okay.
It went through its own little metamorphosis.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, good
Became
one. They've transformed the language of perversion into something cute and
Yeah, just
short and
something-
cute.
Yeah.
So I did further research and I typed in the Japanese word hentai
Mhm.
in there, and so when I put the keyword hentai in, there were a couple kind of extended keyword search results, and one of them was this thing called hentai kamen. Have you heard of the word kamen somewhere else?
Uh-uh.
I mean, commonly.
No?
But-
Kamen? Commonly?
Yeah.
Kamen.
Oh, common. No, I haven't. So,
Kamen.
Coming?
No?
Coming?
Kamen.
Okay.
No. I was just trying to guess what it could relate
Oh,
to.
like, perhaps like... da-dun, 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 da-dun,
Oh, you mean something to us.
da-dun, da-dun,
Oh, no. We're not catching his reference.
You
and
were
I feel
losing.
We're making
What are
ourselves
you
sorry. Is she cringing or is she smiling at
No,
this?
I just feel guilt when I don't catch a reference.
No, it's okay. Sorry. Like,
Makes me
I
so
threw this upon
embarrassed.
you all. It's the theme song to Sailor Moon.
Oh,
Sorry, I'm bad at singing.
So the first thing
No.
that come up on Google search is the fan fiction animated porn version of Sailor Moon.
Well, I'm sure there are. There are hentai versions of Sailor Moon
Yeah.
and her, like, on and off again relationship with Tuxedo Kamen, her love interest. So Tuxedo Kamen, that's where I was going. Kamen is the word for mask. And so, yeah, this is like this other thing about like Japanese people in masks. I don't know what it is, but anyway, there's another animation or a manga called hentai kamen. Literally mean like the hentai, the masked hentai.
Okay.
I actually know. I read this in a pretty popular like Japanese comic book series.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically this guy that is wearing a mankini with like really lacy, frilly a girl's panties.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, he's wearing panties on his face like a mask
Okay.
with the crotch like basically where his nose is. You can probably
Perfect.
imagine, right? And then he also wears thigh-high fishnet stockings.
That's
Like-
spectacular.
What?
That's my Halloween costume.
Yes. Let's get that trending.
So was he like a hentai superhero? Like
Yes.
going around and...
Yeah. Yes. He's a hentai superhero. Basically, like he has this like love interest, and he basically steals women's underwear and likes to wear them on his face.
Nice.
Okay.
He's a pervert.
Etchy.
He's very etchy, but then basically he is like a defender of like all panties and whatnot. He loves panties and he loves to wear them and he needs them to transform. Oh, there's that word again.
Hey.
Yeah, he transform into this like thing called hentai kamen, the masked hentai. So like his perversion actually gives him strength
Okay.
to be the superhero that like basically knocks out the bad or even more
Great.
perverted people. So I thought that was really interesting that like from an innocent, a very innocent search
word
query of the word hentai in Japanese ended up like me going through this like rabbit hole of this character, this anime character called Hentai Kamen, the masked hentai, that, you know, that loves to steal women's panties and wear them on his face and then getting energy out of it. You know, so his perversion actually gives him strength to be the superhero.
So I do have one question.
Yes,
How
yes.
did tentacles get involved in all this?
Oh yeah. Well, it's I don't know if I jotted down the actual name of it, but it comes from a really old artwork
Okay.
by. Do you guys know the Great Waves?
Yes, of course.
The Great
Yes.
Waves of it's an artist by Hokusai. So Hokusai is like famous for that the Great Waves, right, with the Mount Fuji in the picture and there's the Great Waves and whatnot. So that's like block print, right? That's block print
Yeah.
artwork. Hokusai also is famous for this one art called like the Dream of a Fisherman's Wife, I think is called the title of the artwork. I have not seen it because I'm a little afraid.
Googling now.
But according to we'll be right back after these messages. So Hokusai has this artwork. It's like apparently it's like depicting a woman having sex with two octopus-like monsters.
Okay.
So I don't
Yep.
know where he got his inspiration. We got to bring Hokusai on the podcast for that. But But what I will say is that there probably is like residual kind of like interest. I don't know your first encounter with tentacle porn or whatnot. I'm sure every culture has iterations of it, like pulpo sex. I don't know.
Could be.
Pulpo sex could be a thing. You never know.
Staring at the block art, it sort of makes sense though, right? Like you have this octopus all of a sudden, guys. Here I am getting into tentacle porn in front of us all.
Yeah. Google is gonna start suggesting some interesting search results for you.
Oh, girl, my phone is forever skewed after doing this podcast.
Oh, for sure.
The algorithm's going to work against you now.
Opening up a browser in front of people and then being like, I have this podcast. No, what's super interesting is like, it sort of makes sense. Like it's this woman and there's an octopus and the suction of the octopus is on the clitoris.
Oh.
And then it's like tangling the rest of the body in a very like bondagey sort of way. Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, this is fascinating.
That's
what a world.
My goodness, this podcast is going full circle today. Yeah, so like instead of rope, I guess Hokusai used octopus.
So like a living rope.
Yeah, a living slithering rope. Yeah,
okay.
with I guess that
could also penetrate you.
Yeah, I'm starting to understand it.
Okay.
I've seen some hentai porn where it's like the penis was like like a slithering octopus like really long thing that had a mind of its own, and
or like a lot of girl on girl hentai where you'll see like the tentacles come out of that one girl's vagina.
Sure, yeah. As if it's like a monster.
I guess.
Demeaning.
A little Freudian there.
Yeah. So I think that's where it may have came from. Like these like more modern interpretations of tentacle sex and whatnot may have came from Hokusai's artwork of the
was it the fisherman's wife?
Dream of the Fisherman's Wife.
Dream of the Fisherman's Wife. Yeah, by Hokusai. So I think that's where it came from.
Cool. So okay, follow up question to the kind of on the porn
spectrum.
Scape.
Yep.
Pornscape. So we talked about how trying to depict things in an artful way to kind of talk about sex within Japanese culture in
a safe way.
Yeah. So is that why Japanese porn must be censored?
Right. Oh yes. So So if you've never seen Japanese porn legally you have to have the private part, like the genitals. Just the genitals, not the boobs, being censored. And so some people don't like it, and other people find it to be very fascinating and actually more arousing that you don't see it all. So yes, from my understanding, yes, it is a legal thing where though they would allow for porn to be created, there are some boundaries in terms of how explicit the porn can be. And I think that's why it's like censored. I don't know if they're trying to do it to be more tasteful. I don't know, like at what point is like pixelating genitals going to be even like any more, PC?
It does seem like a little,
like censorship,
a little irrelevant or a little superfluous.
Yeah, like at that point, it's sort of like these actors
there.
Yes, it's already there. boom, there it is. Shakalaka, but like. Yeah, like, I think it's, again, it might be this, like, push and pull kind of situation. A little bit of that BDSM kind of sensibility put into the porn industry itself, no matter what they're filming. Maybe it's a little bit of this, we don't want to go all the way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, we got to leave some things. It's the covered, uncovered situation, throw in a little of that what'd you say? Like the book says, right? Like the half covered or half
covered,
half dressed,
or half covered. There's something to be said about the, not all the way there.
Yeah.
Suggestive almost sensibility in Japanese porn that, yes, it is the law, but also I think they do it and they go with it because of that. This push and pull, this of not going all the way. And is the it's not even demure. It's the Does that make sense?
That
makes sense.
I think that's what it is adding to it.
I've been fawning over your notes the whole time. So
Oh,
anything
thank
we missed in
you.
the notes,
Oh
I
yeah.
definitely want you to send those to us.
Yeah.
if you want, then we could post them as an addendum to the episodes.
It's just like Kevin has an active mind sometimes, and his mind goes to certain places. Not necessarily tentacle sex, but
it was relevant.
yeah. And now Marcella has a visual
whole new
representation.
fetish.
I'm exploring a whole new thing,
A
guys.
whole new thing. It's like right click save. Save for
it's
save
back on my
as.
computer. You just can't see it.
Yeah, it's like save for reference under BDSM
Put in
animal.
my files.
Animal related BDSM. I don't know.
Then we start getting into like furry culture. I mean, like
Oh my
we'll
gosh.
dive in.
You guys should talk about that.
Oh,
Yeah.
we should do.
Oh,
this.
we
should talk
will.
about furries.
Yeah. Yes. So definitely this conversation will continue onward for you guys. But I appreciate you guys including me in the conversation today.
Thanks.
Thank you
Oh,
so
Thank you
much.
for joining us.
Japanese style.
Japanese style.
Isn't it
That's
very
so-
saucy?
It's so saucy.
It's such a saucy. Let's dunk our nuggets in it.
Chicken nuggets.
And I hope the listeners also appreciated the.
They learned something. I definitely learned something.
I learned
This is really
something.
interesting.
We had a lot of twists and turns. I'll get it. Twists and turns.
Ah.
I'm back to our rope
Tentacles.
bondage.
Excellent.
All right.
I'm Megan.
I'm Marcella.
And I'm Colin.
And I'm Kevin.
Thank you for joining us.
You will
Everyone
agree
go
that the concept
have
will
some
contribute
tasty
to the rearing
Japanese
of a
food
mature
now.
person.
Dump in that sauce.
Saucy, saucy, pickle.
It's been continuing